The Owl House is without a doubt one of the best shows that Disney has brought forth in recent years, no less due to the persistent effort of the crew behind it. With the show nearing its premature end, thanks to Disney cutting it and effectively robbing it of a full season of greatness, we are here to give the show its due. Out of fairness, we won't cover Season 3 in our list, not only because there are 2 more specials to go, but also because it would simply be cheating since each episode of the season is technically made up of 2 in 1. Enough talking though, let's get started. I'm Keegan and you're watching the top 7 episodes of The Owl House. Number 7. Hunting Palisman, the first entry on our list, and we're already starting with a substantial episode because this is the first proper meeting between Luz and the Golden Guard, aka Hunter. Small note, this episode was written by the show's creator, Dana Terrace, and for her first time penning an episode, it turned out really well because it gives us a lot of information over the span of just 20 minutes. The episode begins in Belos' castle where the Emperor assembles the 9 Coven heads whom we see together for the first time. We get a first glimpse at the Day of Unity and learn about the relationship between Belos and the Golden Guard, Hunter, who is Belos' right hand and a teen prodigy according to Lilith. Him being buddy-buddy with Belos is not the only reason for a grudge for the now disposed Lilith, but he's also a thorn in Kikimora's side. The episode wastes no time in establishing these 3 relationships, all of which are different in nature, and something to take note of going forward. So far, Belos has been acting in the shadows from the walls of his castle for most of the show's run, and the meeting with the Coven heads is one of the rare moments where we see him in a more active role. However, the meeting is cut short when he doubles over in pain and needs to retreat. Alone with his right hand, we briefly see the effects of his illness that causes Hunter to offer him his help in finding more palisman. We already know from Agony of a Witch that Belos uses them as a remedy after all. Hunter calls him uncle, but the real nature of their relationship is still left unclear. In Belos' eerie moment of giving comfort to a worried Hunter, we're given an incredible foreshadowing if you look back on this detail with the knowledge of what happens later. At first glance, Belos putting his hand on Hunter's right shoulder seems ordinary, but what catches your attention is what happens next. His goop dripping down on it. Later, in King's Tide, we see that the goop remains on Hunter's right shoulder before Hunter enters the portal. I don't know if the connection between the 2 scenes is deliberate or pure coincidence, but either way, it's brilliant. Meanwhile, Luz is failing at making any progress with the Echo Mouse, with finding a way back home, and together with Ida attends the Palisman Adoption Day at Hexside. Here, we also get the resolution of an open left plot device from Season 1, the Bat Queen's whistle that she had left Ida behind. Although, who knows if it'll come into play again later, since the Bat Queen tells Ida to keep it. This show likes Chekhov's guns after all. While the students of Hexside seemingly make progress in their magic studies and immediately find a new kin in their palisman, Luz is trailing behind and must confront the Bump in her dream of becoming a witch. Speaking of Bump, we also learn the name of Principal Bump's palisman Fruin, and get to hear the Hexside students' wishes, including Gus's dream of becoming an ambassador to the human realm. Despite the cut of the 3rd season, which also affected the production of this season, it's nice to see that Dana and the crew picked up on the fandom's interest in Viney and gave her a small moment in the episode. Back to our 2 main characters for the episode, this is where Luz and Hunter's paths begin to cross, since both of them want to get palisman for different reasons. Hunter so he can help Belos, and Luz wants a staff to evolve further as a witch. The moment on the airship is one of my favorite interactions between them, and this entire episode just screams brother and sister dynamic. And you already kind of get the feeling that the bad but sad boy is going to be redeemed thanks to Luz. Hunter is a great foil to her and vice versa. Just like Luz, he can't perform magic without his staff, and he wants to prove himself worthy of serving the Emperor's Coven. Being Belos' right hand does not bring him any cookie points with the rest of the Coven, and you would think that his beloved uncle would put in a good word for him. The fact that Hunter still has to fight for his place in the Coven kind of tells you how much Belos really cares about him, but Hunter is too blinded by his loyalty and devotion. It turns out that Hunter is well versed in wild magic, at least enough to draw a connection between Luz's glyphs and the now forgotten practice of elemental magic, dating back to the Savage Ages. Their shared fascination for magic is nice to see, and is what leads Luz to ask him what made him want to join the Coven. And once he opens his mouth, you immediately see that the kind and generous Belos in his story is not the same guy we have seen so far, and that there's probably more to Hunter's story than Hunter himself is aware of. They both bond, sort of, over their unclear future, and Luz is once again confronted with the fact of not having thought things through. We are told that Hunter finds comfort in having a purpose, albeit one that was bestowed upon him by someone else, while Luz is uncertain of what to do because of the freedom she has. Seeing how she actually doesn't have a concrete plan in her mind beyond becoming a witch, with the goal to eventually return to her mother, Luz must contend with the consequences of her escapism, which led her to the Boiling Isles in the first place. And I like how they don't just talk about it and then get it over with in just one episode. Instead, we get to see Luz struggle with it throughout the whole season, which makes it more realistic. The two manage to save the Palisman from Kikimora, who tries to kill off Hunter to make way for herself as Belos' new devotee, and both Luz and Hunter get a Palisman. Though in Luz's case, she has yet to carve it out of the Palistrum wood that Ida and King stole for her. Stealing is fine as long as it's for your family, right? Meanwhile, Little Rascal, aka Flapjack, chooses Hunter as his new owner, which will be a problem down the road, knowing that Belos doesn't take too well with Palisman. And as we know, there is much more to Flapjack than we're told, which is another reminder why this episode does a good job of setting up what's to come, and therefore is a worthy number 7. Number 6. Knock Knock Knockin' on Hootie's Door. Being one of the episodes impacted by the cut of the season order, this episode might be perhaps the one where this is visible the most, due to its structure breaking away from the other episodes of the season. Dana and the crew decide that it's the attention-seeking yet lovable birdworm demon's turn to be the center of an episode, and the way they do this is clever and reminiscent of the season 1 episode Once Upon a Swap, which followed a similar narrative structure that was divided into 3 parts for each main character. The episode begins in the Owl House, where we hear Hootie typing a letter to Lilith, expressing his concern about the trio. Luz is desperately trying to find a way home, but also love-stricken with Amity. King wants to know about his origins and grapples with the absence of his dad, and Ida is sick with worry and very visibly restless about Rain, who had been captured by the Coven Heads, and about the impending Day of Unity. You might wonder why this episode is not placed higher. That's because it starts out strong but struggles with the third act. For clarity, the progression of Luz and Amity's relationship is an important part of the show, and the fact that them coming together this fairly early on is amazing because 99% of the time, fictional couples get dragged out until the final moments of the show, which seems to be a common popular formula for some reason. But Luz kinda received the short end of the stick in this one. In comparison to Ida and King's parts that are concerned with their individual arcs, in Ida's case, her confronting the owl beast that has been living inside of her as a result of the curse, and King asking the important questions about who he is, Luz's part, which only deals with her insecurities and lack of self-worth in regards to her love life, feels lacking, to put it lightly. This would have been a great moment to focus more on her insecurities and self-doubt of becoming a witch, and we know by this point that Luz has 2 conflicting desires, being a witch and returning home to the human realm to be with her mom, both of which she already deems as mutually exclusive because of her fear that Camilla won't support her dream. Considering that the previous episodes leading up to this one kept reminding the viewers that Luz did decide to stay on her own terms prior to the destruction of the portal, and that she's been dealing with the guilt of not being able to cure Ida from her curse, on top of the guilt of lying to her mom about her whereabouts, it would have been the perfect opportunity to give us more insight into Luz's inner turmoil, similar to what we've seen in Ida's part, which is my favorite of the episode. The episode also gives us more lore information and background on demons, most notably that there are 3 types of demons: bug, biped, and beast. The highlight of the episode is King and Ida discovering their innate powers, thanks to Hootie no less. You finally did it, Hootie. You did something good. And in hindsight, it turns out that swallowing the letter was a good thing because...
Get off of me and get that Titan!
Well, you know. Ida decides to confront the owl beast head on after being forced into sleep by Hootie. I wish that I could fall asleep so easily with one bite of a cookie. After nearly 1.5 seasons since we've been introduced to the curse, we finally get Ida's backstory and learn through a series of past memories how the curse impacted her life. And we also get to see her dad, Del, who fell victim to the owl beast after unknowingly provoking it with fireworks. And similar to Luz, Ida feels guilty about this, choosing to put the blame on the owl beast and hunting it down rather than trying to understand the creature. We also learn that she and Rain had indeed been seeing each other before Rain joined the Bard Coven, and that they ended their relationship because of Ida growing distant due to her curse, not wanting to endanger them as well. I would also like to give a shout out and compliment the attention to detail here, because we can see young adult Ida wearing her gold ring, which she later gave to Lilith at the end of Wing It Like Witches. We also see the owl beast's perspective when it got captured by someone resembling the Collector before it got banned into the curse spell Parchment, and as we know, got bought on the black market by Lilith afterwards. This sequence of memories culminates at a beach where we see Ida and the owl beast now being strung together by the common red thread, which is surprisingly on the nose for a show that likes to use ambiguous imagery, but it is shortly after followed by a huge canvas of beautiful colored lights in the sky. We see the two bonding with each other right before we get a reveal of Harpy Ida, and let me just say, to whoever came up with the design, you did a great job and I hope they gave you a pay raise, because Ida in Harpy form slays. Definitely one of my favorite character designs in the show, and it kind of makes me feel bad for wanting her to keep the curse, so we get to see more of it. What makes Ida's arc so powerful is that it can be read as an accurate representation of coping with disability, which is told beautifully through the episode, as it tells us a story of self-empowerment and acknowledging what makes you different makes you stronger. On the flip side, King, whose situation is similar in that regard, is desperately trying to find a tag to put on himself, and in contrast to Luz, who is struggling with her future, King doesn't know what to make of his past without a figure there to guide him. While Hootie's message of King being king is valid, it does play on the typical trope that you usually encounter in children's media, and I'm glad that they went the other route with it, because if I were King in that situation, I would have snapped too. The message of being yourself can be a powerful one, but only if it's delivered in a meaningful way. And it's King's outburst here that leads to this big discovery of him having unique powers, which will definitely come in handy later on. Moving on to the last resident of the Owl House, we see Luz trying to figure out how to ask out Amity, and we do get some background information about her life at home before she came to the Demon Realm. Unsurprisingly, she has had other romantic pursuits before Amity, which makes sense for her character, but she was deemed cheesy by her peers and thus became scared of showing her true feelings out of fear of rejection. Something that I think Amity would have understood, since this is something the two have in common.
You were afraid of getting rejected. What if I went to Grom with you instead? Really? That's what friends do.
But in the case of Luz, this fear is rooted deeper and goes back to her mistreatment and neglect in school, as well as back at home with Camila. I know, thanks to them gives us more explanation about the Nositas, and I did not want to leave it unmentioned here. Still, it's interesting that Luz tells the Echo Mouse that everyone back at home used to tell her this, also implying Camila. With the information we've gotten and thanks to them, however, this might not actually be true, because as we learn later, Camila was rather supportive of her daughter. Again, this makes sense and is in line with Luz's characterization, because she is someone who tends to overthink and feel more than she lets on in front of others, and she has tendencies of trying to please the people around her because she doesn't want to let them down. Turns out the house has a basement where Hootie planned a special surprise. On this note, another thing the episode does well is show different areas of the Owl House, including the nearby tower that we saw King and Hootie in, which we knew was there because of the beginning of the show, but we never got around to seeing it. We're led to the Tunnel of Love after Luz finds Amity in the basement. We get a rather awkward ride on the boat, during which Luz, in her attempt to cover up the truth, breaks Amity's heart and makes her deepest fear, which we knew from the Grom episode, come true. But do not despair, Luz, because Ida shows up being the one to save the day, paving the way for couple Lumity. And I think you would agree when I say out of this trio, Ida is the one with the biggest transformation in this episode, and took a huge step forward in regards to her mental health. Hootie, being Hootie, makes up for his mistakes by promising everyone to never help them again, which I do find funny because he was the MVP of the episode and the one who got the ball rolling, but I also guess you cannot blame them. Still, the most surprising thing to come out of this episode is definitely Hootie's dedication to his loved ones, and it's nice to see him being appreciated after so long. And that is that. Don't get me wrong, I still think that Knock Knock Knockin' on Hootie's Door is a perfectly balanced episode with laughs, tears, and interesting bits of lore and character background, and it's by no means a bad episode. But when you review a quality show like The Owl House, which only has good episodes, especially in Season 2, some of them are bound to be winners and losers, but this rating list is in no way fixed in stone, and we're all here to share the love for this show. Number 5, Agony of a Witch. After the breath of fresh air that Knock Knock Knockin' on Hootie's Door provided us as one of the rare lighthearted entries in the show's definitely darker second season, it also reminds you that there were indeed happier times in the course of the show. Agony of a Witch is not one of them, though. In my opinion, this is the darkest episode of the first season, which still holds up relatively well knowing what followed in the episodes succeeding it. What's even more off-putting is that this is the episode that comes right after the fun sports episode, where you see nerds and jocks teaming up together and having a good time, but Lilith not so much. And you can see her breaking point at the end of the episode, which carries right over into this one. We open with a wide shot of the exterior of Belos' castle, where we see a bunch of people on their way to death or petrification, which is a really dark way to start an episode. Because of this, she does not want her sister to suffer the same fate, so she vows one more time, and really, this is the last time after failing over and over again all season long to capture Ida for good. But moments later, you're already starting to doubt that thanks to the Owl House's breathing defense system. Hooty, who manages to beat up Lilith and every single one of her henchmen. Having a birdworm kick her butt surely did not do any favors for her pride. Still, you're glad for the scene because it's building up softly for what's about to happen throughout the rest of the episode. Though you can argue about whether or not it does a good job at that, because having a sudden shift of tone from the bleak opening scene to this feels a little bizarre and almost out of place. Meanwhile, Ida is preparing a magic cloak out of witch's wool to be able to repel the magic spells used by Belos' guards. And Luz does what anyone in her situation would, worry about her surrogate mother, because at this point, they are well past the stage of teacher and student. I like how this plays into Ida's curse, which Luz brings up, and of course right on cue it pops up again and we have a brief moment inside Ida's mind where she tries to grasp the culprit behind her curse. Boy, is she in for a surprise later. We find out that Ida has been lying about her curse, which became worse, which is reminiscent of the scene with her and Rain, where she tries to hide her curse. Comparing the episodes side by side like this gives us a nice sense of continuity, which this show is fairly good at. Being the good person she is, Luz wants to help, and in a sad twist of fate, that's what ends up putting Ida in danger. This episode clearly marks the climax of the siblings' conflict, and for being the penultimate episode of the season, in my opinion, it does a better job at scaling the stakes than the actual finale, but maybe I'm biased. The episode does feature a pretty cool fight scene between two Clawthorns, which leads to one of the show's most gripping moments, when Ida's time runs out and she gets overpowered by her curse. We also get the revelation of Lilith being the one responsible for this, which was kind of foreseeable and makes you hate her even more. Even so much to the point that the fandom cancelled her, for exactly 1 week. And the point in this episode where you really realize the gravity of the situation is when Luz arrives at the Owl House by herself and you see a happy, oblivious king jump out of the cake, next to the wool cloak that Ida has made for Luz. This scene just punches you in the gut every time you watch it because it shows you Luz arriving at her yet lowest point, by making her sink to her knees, which is a powerful image to leave your viewers with. And you just need to know what happens next. I'm not gonna lie, part of me wishes that this was the ending we got for the season finale, which ended on a rather positive note but didn't carry as many emotions as this scene here does. But maybe that's what makes Agony of a Witch so good, being shaken to your core by an episode that you wouldn't expect it from. Number 4, Echoes of the Past. With our next entry on the list though, you do know what you're getting into, and it's an overdue one. Echoes of the Past is essentially the background story of King. After a season that mainly focused on 2 of the 3 main characters, barring King, our little demon finally gets an episode to call his own, and it's one of my favorites in the entire show. And I'm totally not just saying that because I cried throughout most of it. We open with a flashback of a younger Ida entering a castle and being seemingly attacked before we cut right into the intro. Already, the fact that the episode starts with a flashback of younger Ida is a good sign because everybody knows that flashback episodes are almost always some of the best of a show. We then see Luz, who is working on discovering new glyphs, and this is where one of the most important but glossed over moments in the show takes place. Luz discovering an invisibility spell. Having spent the first season discovering all existing glyphs, this season deals with experimentation. The spell does come in handy later on in the episode and remains an important plot device for further down the line when Luz confronts Belos. And going into this episode, you can already tell that they were setting it up with this scene. We're also shown the new strange dynamic of Lulu and Hootsufer, which is certainly a combo that I did not expect, but it somehow works. King tells us about his past as the king of demons before he was usurped from his throne and fell victim to a shrinking spell. Well, that's his version of events anyway, but as a viewer you already know that this is not how things went down. And it stinks even more when fantasy-loving goofball Luz, out of all people, writes it off as a story and plays along as to not upset King. If you've watched enough television, you know that this is a common formula to create conflict between characters, and as expected, it later comes back to bite them. This episode is an important stepping stone for Luz and King's relationship, which we've seen develop in the previous season. And with most of the focus lying on Luz and Ida and their relationship, saying that Luz and King's relationship did not feel as rounded out as theirs is a fair argument, but that is why this episode exists, to remind us of their siblinghood, and the theme of siblinghood is a prevalent one throughout all of the second season. See Luz and Hunter, or Philip and Caleb, after season 1 mostly dealt with Ida and Lilith's. Echoes of the Past serves as the starting point for King's arc this season and already tells us what we get confirmed later on, in Edge of the World. that King is a Titan, which in hindsight seems pretty obvious, and I will say that it is one of the less impactful revelations that we got throughout the season. But where this episode scores is in the sucker-punching emotions. Alex Hirsch did an incredible job on this episode, which seems even more impressive when you know that he's not a professional voice actor. Yes, he did a couple of characters in Gravity Falls, but his performance as King here takes the cake. The conversation between King and Luz is not only sad, but also comes with a powerful line by King, and by Luz herself.
Everyone lied, and I was too caught up in the fantasy to realize it.
I'm sorry I lied about what I believed.
We not only get a parallel between these two characters, but also a juxtaposition between Luz, who tries to be open and honest with the people around her and is usually seen lying in order to protect people, and Emperor Belos, who openly lies about his beliefs to the public for his own gain. Even though he does not appear in this episode, you can still feel the impact he's had, evidenced via the state of the abandoned castle, which was home to at least one Titan, and it's not so unlikely that Belos had a hand in this. And King, whom we know is dearly attached to Luz, whom he views as a big sister, directly calls her out here. By own admission, he comes to accept that he willingly subjected himself into a reality that never was, without questioning it. Luz did the same thing when she first set foot into the Boiling Isles and decided to stay and follow her pursuit of becoming a witch, despite being repeatedly told by those around her that humans can't do magic. King saying that he doesn't know what's real or what's fake can also be read as foreshadowing, when Luz is later on faced with the truth of Belos being Philip, a truth that Luz tries to deny. The trust that Luz and King build between each other is what eventually helps King accepting of her to let her go into the moment of sacrifice, and while the Edge of the World fulfills a similar role in reinforcing their relationship, Echoes of the Past lays the groundwork. Last thing I'll say here is that we get what's likely another piece of foreshadowing in this episode, with King going boop on Ida's nose, mirroring the Collector's motion when stopping the draining spell. Think we're reaching too much with this one? Fair enough, but with this show you never know what might end up being relevant later. Number 3. Them's the breaks, kid. Remember what we told you a second ago about the relevance of the smallest of things? Because the theme of experimentation that we mentioned in our previous entry is back again, and it's written all over this episode. We see Luz once again trying out new glyph combos, and even see in her notebook that she found a petrification spell, which I kind of would have liked to see in action at some point, because it really could have come in handy in her fight against Philip. Being determined to find a way back home, Luz is not intent on taking a break, mirroring Ida just a couple of episodes prior. But this time it's not Hootie who comes to the rescue, but the Owl Lady herself, who decides to tell a tale from her youth. In fact, she tells us about how she met Rain Whispers, which was just 7 months short of the fateful day of Ida and Lilith's duel in the tryouts for the Emperor's Coven. And basically, pretty much the entire episode is a flashback. A risky decision by the writers, but it works, because even though it's told from Ida's point of view, we also get to see a bunch of the older cast at Hexside, including Lilith, a much younger Bump, and the parents of the Hexside kids. Now, why did I point out the theme of experimentation earlier on? It's because we see the students of Ida's time participating in a training program for future witches, where they're undergoing different exercises with the use of a wide variety of magic. Even though the Coven track system did already exist by Ida's time, we see Ida herself use different magic spells, like Abomination. We're also introduced to Rain, whom Ida considers her equal when it comes to raw magic. The episode does a great job at showcasing the diversity of the magic in the demon realm, or at least what's found in the Boiling Isles, and encourages the practice of all kinds of magic spells. And as we know from the previous season, Ida is a strong advocate of just that. We also see how the Clawthorne siblings started out strong as one team, and then grew distant due to Lilith sacrificing more time for her tryout studies when Ida became close with Rain. In a way, this parallels the story of Philip and Caleb, a pair of two brothers who only had each other and were later separated because of the allure of magic. Both tales feature one sibling who was more open-minded about experimenting and discovering what was out there, and another who got left behind in the result, trying to get the edge over their sibling due to their insecurity. Furthermore, this episode not only gives us an insight into Rain in the past, but in the present as well, by cleverly tying in a little detail from a previous episode. Rain's drinking spell, which is an effective way of covering up the scheme of him, Darius, and Eberwolf. If there is one point of critique to be made about this episode, it's that we're given a major significant piece of information regarding the Day of Unity in a very underwhelming way. While it makes sense for Darius to deliver the news to Rain like this, having it presented to us as a drawing on a piece of paper undermines the reveal of Belos's plan just a bit. All in all, them's the breaks. Kid manages to tell a heartfelt story about the past and ties in well enough with the main storyline, being a worthy entry on our list. Also, Ida prequel when, Disney? Number 2, Hollow Mind. If you ask someone, what's the darkest episode of this show, they will likely point you to this episode, with good reason. But dark is not a guarantor for good. And is this a good episode though? Yes, so let's dive in. It's time to take a trip down memory lane. As you know by now, episodes with backstories are some of the best ones. We're back at the night market where we get some more information about how deep and widespread Belos' reach among the common folk of the Boiling Isles is, and Ida's resources are running thin when she gets turned down by a former ally who's joined a coven thanks to Belos' propaganda against the likes of her. Much to the dismay of Luz, who exclaims,
But how can I prove he's actually evil? It feels so obvious, but no one believes me.
"Oh Luz, if only you knew." That is definitely going to come back to bite you later, and that's the charm of dramatic irony. Knowing something the character doesn't, since at this point we know that Philip Wittebane is the guy she's after, despite having helped him reach this point as Belos. After shenanigans ensue between the quasi-siblings, Luz and Hunter get trapped in Belos' mind, which Palisman can't seemingly enter because Flapjack does not get teleported with them. But he does the right thing and seeks refuge in the Owl House together with the others. If only Hunter had followed his example, but that's the thing about redemption arcs. You gotta make your characters go through a bunch of suffering, lessons, and more suffering until they get it. We end up in Belos' mindscape, which seems to be a copy of his castle's walls, with his own portrait gallery of memories showing his achievements as Emperor. Luz tries to tell Hunter that Belos is evil, but to no avail. Things pick up speed when seemingly two inner Beloses appear, and one of them looks much more frightening than the other. So logic has it that they trust the one that looks more harmless because kids are innocent creatures, right? While this does make sense to some degree, Luz could have easily known that Kid Belos was in fact the real inner Belos due to the similarity to the inner Willow in regards to appearance. But okay, she is new to this, so we'll let it slide. Things get really interesting when we get to Belos' real mindscape, which looks less glamorous and bears many secrets that are laid out in plain sight for us viewers, but are overlooked by Luz and Hunter, which makes the events of the episode more painful to watch, knowing that the truth that they're looking for is right there in his memories. As we've said before, the show is good at utilizing its scenery, and here we're being told an entire story about the Wittebane brothers completely in pictures. The show loves to play with details. Wouldn't you know, Luz's initial perception about the missing trees in the gallery mindscape was correct. While it makes perfect sense for a plant-coded character like Willow to have a mindscape full of trees, that is not what you would expect in the mind of someone like Belos. This confirms to us that, despite Hunter saying that everyone's mindscape is individual, trees do seem to be a common occurrence in someone's mindscape. Meanwhile, Hooty once again becomes the key to Ida's problems thanks to his annoyingly loud noise alarming Darius, Rain, and Eberwolf of the Owl Lady's predicament, because she can't do magic to successfully make a potion for the mindscape transportation. Similar to Agony of a Witch, this episode, despite being one of the darkest of the show, does not do a complete 180 and still takes its time for a joke, as we briefly see outside of Belos' mindscape, and once again at Hooty's expense because nobody's really sure what he is. And right after, we see Belos commit mass suicide. Yay, how fun. Probably the darkest scene in the entire show because it shows you how far Belos is willing to go to fulfill his self-imposed mission of banning wild magic. What makes this scene so cruel is that the Golden Guard has to check their pulses to confirm if they're still alive or not, which tells you that previous attempts went badly. Though in Belos' case, innocent witches unknowingly dying by his own martyring hand must have been secretly enjoyable. And he was willing to take the risk with other subjects without knowing whether they'd live or die. Upon returning to the mindscape, Monster Belos finds them, and oh, the parallels. A shout out to the director and storyboard artists for giving us this harrowing shot of Monster Belos and Hunter, right in front of a picture of a younger Philip crossing his brother. And if you look closely, Philip's eyes are glowing blue, meaning that he already must have begun experimenting with magic and maybe even consuming Palisman when Caleb was still alive. Once again, Belos, now in the form of his materialized emotions, discovers his brother betraying him and history is about to repeat itself. We finally get to meet the Collector, who turns out to be a bratty child that's been aiding Belos in his nefarious plan, and Hunter gets to swallow a hard pill upon learning that he is a clone of someone else, whom we know is Philip's older brother, Caleb. Back in the tree gallery, Hunter walks past the memory of Philip killing his brother in cold blood, and if that imagery wasn't enough to give you goosebumps, the graveyard of mindlessly strewn Golden Guard helmets sure does. If seeing corpses of various versions of yourself isn't traumatizing, I don't know what is, and it goes to show again how cruel Belos is, and what sets him apart from other antagonists. Luz and Hunter meet the real Belos, who, spoiler alert, has been with them the whole time and managed to deceive them. He explains to them all that the mutated monster is indeed a materialized form of the emotions and memories of all of the Palisman he's killed. And you know what makes a man even more dislikable? animal cruelty. And now I am glad that Flapjack wasn't able to come with Hunter after all. Hunter is not the only one to be stirred out of his false reality, which is probably a good time to remind you of what King had told Luz earlier in Echoes of the Past. Luz must bear the ugly truth of Philip Wittebane, the fellow human that had been looking for a way home whom she'd helped, and the Emperor Belos, the towering figure behind the mask wiping out an entire people, becoming one and the same man, and unknowingly she played right into his hand, effectively becoming his pawn just like Hunter. King and Ida sacrificed the remaining bits of Titan's blood from the Eclipse Lake to save Luz and Hunter from Belos' hellscape, but the damage is already done. The consequences of their stay in Belos' mind sinks in, and Hunter, in his panic-stricken frenzy, runs away. With all the Titan's blood used up, and with Belos knowing what Hunter now knows, both Luz and Hunter have lost their way home. Hollow Mind is definitely one of the strongest episodes in the show, especially because it proves the effectiveness of show don't tell, and it's a turning point for Hunter, who is at the cusp of his redemption. A worthy contender for second place. Number 1. Yesterday's Lie. If you were to ask someone about their number 1 spot, you might get a different answer, and that's because the show has a lot of gems, and Yesterday's Lie is no exception. It marks the end of the first half of Season 2 and sets up what's to come in the later half and in Season 3, but it also gives us information about plot points that were left open in Season 1. But before I get ahead of myself, let's take a look. After a long time following the destruction of the portal in the last fight against Belos back in Season 1, Luz and co finally managed to build another portal thanks to the Titan blood that Amity had saved from the portal key. But things go a bit awry, and instead of returning to the human realm, Luz ends up stuck in the in-between realm, which is one of my favorite locations in the show. We later learn that this is also where the Collector spends most of their time while they're being held captive by Belos. And yet, this episode makes no mention of that. We find that it's not possible to use wild magic in this realm. Luz is able to figure out how the floating cubes work and gets to see her mom. Sort of. Because apparently you are absorbed into a reflective surface and only appear as a reflection to the other person. The theme of reflection that runs throughout the episode is a little on the nose, but again, it works. And this is where we meet Luz's doppelganger, whom we knew about since enchanting Gromfright, who also briefly appeared in Keeping Up Appearances, and boy was that spooky. So imagine everyone's surprise when in the place of an evil doppelganger, we're instead shown sweet innocent V, whose original name is number 5. Thanks to plot convenience, Luz is able to follow V by saying her real name out loud when trying to calm herself down by counting to 5. I wonder what would have happened if she only counted to another number, because that is some serious luck. What's remarkable here is that Luz realized that she needed to calm down and knew what to do, which is not something that every 14-year-old would, meaning that Luz has had similar moments of panic and anxiety before and was either taught by someone or taught herself how to cope with them. Back in Luz's room, we get a nice reference to her beta design via her baseball hat and old shirt lying on the floor, right at V's feet in the shot between her and Luz, who is stuck in the mirror's reflection. Effectively, this visual signifies V as Beta Luz, beta meaning prototype. Well, at least that's what the dictionary says, but in this case it makes sense being her doppelganger and all. The writers did not miss with the obvious anime reference, Monster Slayer Academia being a parody of Demon Slayer and Little Witch Academia. What about My Hero Academia? The latter has a similar plot to the Owl House, by the way. Very reflective of you, Luz. We learn that V is a basilisk from the Boiling Isles, who was incarcerated along with the rest of her kind and managed to escape through Ida's open portal door on the day Luz came to the Isles. Instead of owning up to her decision of staying in the Boiling Isles and telling her mom about it, Luz chooses the easy road, lying. Or in this case, withholding information without letting anything else slip, because hey, if you already have a doppelganger, why not make use of it? Which is an evil thought, and another parallel between Luz and Philip, who, while not creating Grimwalkers of himself, had the same idea but for different reasons. But as we've said before, Luz lies out of her own belief that it protects those she loves, which we've seen with King in Echoes of the Past, and also to some degree with Amity in Reaching Out. And that may be attributed to her innate desire not to let people down, which is rooted in anxiety. And of course, she doesn't want Camila to worry about her. Similar to Hollow Mind and Echoes of the Past, we're given brief visuals that hint towards the solution of the big mystery behind the Wittabanes. Here we see a statue that strongly resembles Hunter, aka Caleb and young Philip. At the time of the airing, we did not have confirmation of Hunter's connection with the Wittabanes, but the puzzle pieces were there. Yesterday's Lie does a good job of providing the missing clues to resolving the mystery. In order to keep up the ruse, Luz helps V in her search for the stash of Ida's Hexus Hold'em cards, which she needs to maintain her transformation as Luz. After a brief encounter with evil talking rats, V decides to ask her roommates from summer camp where to find them. We see Luz going through another onslaught of anxiety when being confronted with humans of the same age as her. Considering that she was fine with the talking rats just brief moments ago, this gives us a stark contrast and insight into what it's like for Luz to talk with her peers. Despite not knowing them or having ever interacted with them, her experience of ostracization at school left a deep mark, to the point where she's telling V about marking exit routes and experiencing secondhand embarrassment at V's expense. It's no surprise that when V later tells her about her origins, Luz fails to understand the difference between her situation and V's, showing that they are different people despite everything. When V gets captured, Luz is forced to face the truth and finally talk to her mom. While we're on the topic of V's capture, I'd like to take the time to point out the cruel twist of fate for V here. Keep in mind that she grew up in cages and had no other purpose than being a lab subject for the Emperor. Here we see her once again being subjected to the confines of a small cage, sending her into a bout of fear and anxiety, rightfully so. This episode does a good job at portraying what can be interpreted as animal cruelty and animal activism, which were also shown with the trapped bunny in the beginning of the episode. While on another level, it serves as a narrative tool to show Camila being a caring and compassionate mom, Luz's fears set aside. Even though Camila got bashed by the fans on the grounds of what were shown of her in this episode, I will argue that she is a good mom to Luz, something that is further proved in Thanks to Them. But what stands out the most in this episode is the confrontation between Luz and her mom towards the end, and it's something that we knew was going to come up sooner rather than later. And it hurts. They did not have to make this scene so dramatic and heartbreaking, but I'm a sucker for angst and they delivered. The tearful moment is made even more impactful when Luz slips up about choosing to stay on the boiling isles by her own will, and Camila's concerns are valid. You might say that we see her guilt-tripping Luz into promising her never to leave the human realm again once she returns, which is quite a big promise for Luz to make, considering all the friends and new family she's made there. And that's the thing. Camila doesn't know as much as we do. From her perspective, her daughter could be in danger at any time for all she knows. Camila is essentially looking out for Luz and even tells her that things will change for the better when she comes back home. In their final moments, we're also shown that Luz's magic cloak is now ragged from the exposure to the liquid in the in-between realm, even though the witch's wool is said to repel strong magic. But since wild magic did not work, it wouldn't be a reach if beings and objects with innate magic can't unfold their powers either, which is another nice detail worked in here by the crew that deserves a mention. As we know, the episode ends on a cliffhanger, which is a perfect end to the first half of Season 2, because from here on out, nothing is safe anymore. Yesterday's Lie is the episode that we needed, and the one that was a long time coming because we finally see Luz owning up to her decision and taking responsibility. We also meet her mother Camila again, properly this time, and get an idea of who the person is that shaped Luz. In a sense, this is the successor of Enchanting Gromfright, since we finally get the reveal of Camila's reaction and Luz confronting her deepest fear. Thank you so much for watching our top 7 picks for the Owl House. Creating this list and ranking the episodes in a way that felt legitimate was not easy, but that's the challenge you have when you're reviewing such a good show. There are no honorable mentions here because really every episode is worth a mention. Nevertheless, we hope that you enjoyed the list. Let us know what your picks are down in the comments below and make sure to like and subscribe for more videos. And remember, Frederator loves you.